Everyone, thanks all for coming. I'm Carlos Leiva, I'm the new member of the EBD seminars, and today we're going to start the new season of the EBD seminars with Margarita Florencio, and she's a Ramón y Cajal researcher here at EBD, and she will talk about temporary ponds in peninsular Spain. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the invitation and for coming to everybody. I'm going to talk about the conservation perspectives of temporary ponds in peninsular Spain. I'm going to show you a brief summary, not so brief, of the preliminary results of the two projects that I'm leading right now, and it's close to finish, and only some cues of the new project that we are starting now. This is the team of the Climate Risking Pond project, who has researchers, specialists in conservation of temporary ponds, but also in macroecology of the global change. And this is the other project, the European the biodiversity project. These are the PIs of the project. I'm the PI of the Spanish partner of this project, together with Poli. And I need to say that this team is very pushing everywhere at the same line for the project. That we can see here in our last meeting in May, that everybody is pushing the car to go out of the sands, and Poli is inside the car. Now, at the EBD, as Ramón y Cajal, my main collaborators are Carmen Díaz-Paniagua, and also Laura Serrano from the University of Seville. And with friend in the Climate Risking Pond project, we have Cristian Arnaz, who is finishing his PhD right now, and Pablo Soto Garcia, who is the technician of the project. And in the Respond project, we have a PhD student, who is Marina Tomás Martín, and also we have a technician here, he's around there, is José Luis Sierra González, who is a specialist in the taxonomical identification of zooplankton species. And now we have an upcoming PhD student who is also around here. Now I cannot see him. It's Carlos Vázquez Chavinet, and he's going to do his PhD in the frame of the new project, branchiopods. And I tell you something later about that. Wetlands are everywhere around the world, okay? But we know that they are serious threatened ecosystems. The 70% of the wetlands is estimated that have disappeared since 1900. Now, we have the new European law of natural restoration. We say that it is mandatory, the restoration of the 30% of wetlands before 2030, but also to restore the good quality of habitats for the freshwater species. This is in the line of the European Biodiversity Strategy and the European Green Deal. But also, we have the Plan Estratégico de Humedales a 2030. Here, we need to promote the conservation of this ecosystem of wetlands, but also stop degradation, restore the habitats, and recover the species, recover the ecosystem functioning, the resilience of the ecosystem, and to promote the benefit. One type of temporary ponds are the Mediterranean temporary ponds, which are protected by the European Habitat Directive. And Spain is the first country in Europe containing temporary ponds in the Natura 2000 network. But despite of that, they are disappearing at an alarming pace. For example, this is a normal pond. This look nice, not evident problems. And also we detected a high biodiversity there, a flagship species there, but when we look in detail, we can see that this pond is embedded in a matrix of crops. So to preserve the biodiversity of temporary ponds against global change is an authentic challenging now. First of all, we need to know where are the temporary ponds, where is the pond location. And towards the future, we can see how is the impacts of the global change on biodiversity. The aim of the Climate Risking Pond project is the biodiversity conservation of temporary ponds against biological invasions, climate change, and anthropogenic perturbations. And this is done in two scales. One is the peninsular Spain, and the other is the Doñana National Park at a local scale. In peninsular Spain, we don't have an exhaustive georeferenced cartography. Even that we have is separated by regions, is non-exclusive of temporary ponds, or for example, here the Spanish inventory of wetlands is incomplete. And the best information that we have is this information from Hydrografía, the National Geographic Institute, which is very good but has a low reliability in the water permanence. That happens is we don't know where are the temporary ponds in Spain. So then we decided to construct a cartography of temporary ponds in peninsular Spain. This is a hard work. It's done by the PhD of Christian Arnaz. Now we have more than 9,000 temporary ponds in Spain. And also Christian have selected a subset of ponds, revision through orthophotos what are the main impacts of these temporary ponds. And he detected that a high proportion of ponds had the plowed edge of the ponds or even the plowed basin. Only the 22% of ponds were non-evident impacts, and even worse, the 17 proportion of ponds have completely disappeared. Never happened with water anymore. That we saw also, Christian, is that the unprotected areas obviously show the highest impacts that we observed. But when we look at the areas protected by Natura 2000 network, and also other protection categories, like natural park, national parks, we can see a reduction in the plowed border, in the plowed basin, and in the artificial deepening. But when we only consider the Natura 2000 network, we only manage to see a reduction in the plowed basin, the strongest impact, okay? But probably this is related with other studies that say that the Natura 2000 network is not effective to reduce agricultural intensification. Also, Christian looked at each pond at each moment in the orthophotos and see if the pond had water there. Then modeled the data and detected a serious reduction in the pond inundation since 2000 years, and mainly more evident in autumn. And also he detected that in Spain is related with climatic variables, which is not surprisingly like maximum temperature, precipitations, but also with the impacts that he had detected related with the agriculture. This is Christian. But then we ask, okay, then we need to know how is the situation now and what is happening now. Then we went to sample 104 temporary ponds across all the latitudinal gradients in Spain. It is done with all the team, but this is a responsibility of Pablo Soto Garcia. And it is very difficult because you need to move large distances to go from one pond to the other pond, and many times these ponds are dried or these ponds are inaccessible because you cannot see the limitations in the map. We detected a high variability of ponds in Spain. This is Laguna de Tírez, or on rocks in Madrid, in agriculture, in natural parks, etc. But the most common situation was, again, agriculture. When we look at the environmental variables that we measure in Spain, we detected two gradients. One gradient is of the saline ponds in Spain. The other gradient is worry because many temporary ponds has a high load of nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and also a low concentration of dissolved oxygen. So probably that we are seeing is in relation with this agricultural pollution related with the impacts that we have seen in the cartography. Well, also, we have the past in the temporary ponds. We can know how is the ecological history of the temporary ponds according to the bank of propagules of the pond, of the sediment of the ponds. Because these banks of propagules are authentic ecological and evolutive archives. Then we decided to do the master thesis of José Luis Sierra, co-supervised by Marina Thomas Martin and in collaborator with Dunja Lukic. And we decided to do an experiment about the nutrient pollution through the hatching of the zooplankton from the bank of propagules. So then, on the one, we kept constant the values of the concentration of nutrient, and we simulated the pollution of a well-preserved pond, but also if it is possible the restoration of a temporary pond that is persistent polluted, only through the cessation of pollution. Okay? When we simulate the pollution of the well-preserved pond, we saw that was expected, no? A negative effects on the species richness and in the total abundance of a species. But this is a normal situation in Spain, no? We have a pond in agriculture field, which is drastically reduced and with permanent pollution all the time is polluted, but also have this flagship species of Chirocephalus diaphanus. Then we need to see if we manage to restore this kind of ponds. Okay, we managed to restore the water quality, which is quite interesting, but the species richness, we did not manage to recover the species richness, but only to recover some abundances of the less sensitive species. So maybe that we are assisting is an historic deterioration of the bank of propagules because probably fail of reproduction across time. So it's an impoverishment of the bank of propagules. Other things that also are possible. And maybe we can see some resilience because we recover the water quality as in abundances if we have other ponds that are well preserved in the pondscape that are close to our pond to us as a source-end dynamic. I wanted also to show you the importance of remote sensing as a tool for the conservation of temporary ponds in peninsular Spain. From the beginning, we decided that it was very important to have a hydroperiod layer in peninsular Spain to see the change in hydroperiod. The ponds had a trend of desiccation of what ponds are suffering that. But it's very difficult. So we started to do in Madrid, combining different vectorial water bodies with the sentinel and our own revision of ponds, of if they are temporary ponds or not. And this is the results. The good thing is using the sentinel, we have a very low resolution, which is more appropriate for temporary ponds. And also in Madrid, we have this, the catalog of wetlands. There are different ponds sometimes, no? Like here, in orange, we have 3 ponds in the wetland catalog. And also we have indicated what are the non-native invasive species here. Then we thought, okay, only to see if it is working or not, if it is useful or not, we try to thinking in the general model of geography, if it is the pond surface area, or if it is the maximum hydroperiod of these wetlands, the main responsibles of the richness of the non-native invasive species. And that we detected was that it was a maximum hydroperiod, but not the surface of the ponds, the responsible of the richness of the non-native invasive species. Many of them were fish, so it makes sense, maximum hydroperiod. And it was done with within the last, with the collaborator of David Aragonés. It's not here. The other part of the project is about the temporal change. It is because we focus in Doñana. We know that Doñana, okay, is a reference site, it's well preserved, but many contradictories here. For example, these ponds harbor a population of these flagship species of less than macrostigma, but also has a permanent population or established population of the red swamp crayfish. We know about the tendency for pond desiccation, that is work in Poli and Miguel de Felipe. This is a pond completely covered by terrestrial vegetation. It's not going to flooding again. And also because of this publication of Miguel de Felipe and collaborators, we know that the main cause is the groundwater overexploitation, and also that more than the 60% of ponds have already disappeared. Well, that we decided before all of this was to sample 80 temporary ponds in 2021 that was already sampled in 2007. This is the same temporary ponds sampled in 2021. Many of them, some of them were dried, and then we replaced the ponds for longer hydroperiod ponds. We made an effort to detect non-native species, and we sampled the macroinvertebrate assemblages, the zooplankton assemblages, the aquatic vegetation, and the environmental variables related with the water quality. Now, I call here the variables of change because I use the value of the variable in 2021 less the value of the variable in 2007. For example, here, positive values are related with an increase in electrical conductivity. So we detected an increase in conductivity in 2021, probably associated to the tendencies of pond desiccation, also in pH, an increase in pH, also an increase in turbidity, and also an increase in the concentration of the total phosphorus in the water column. When we look at an index of possible anthropogenic pollution, which is the ratio of total phosphorus between the particulate phosphorus, and it has to be higher than 2. We can see different dots in orange and in red. I would like to highlight here this red Sotos is a small stream flowing from outside, entering in the park, and finalizing in the marshes, that has a very high concentration of orthophosphates and total phosphorus. More than 2 milligrams per liter is a lot. This is a non-native species found in the temporary ponds, and we have two hypotheses. One hypothesis is maybe we have a higher colonization of the non-native species because of the deterioration of the system. But the other one is that maybe we have less colonization because we have a low pond connectivity, a low spatial connectivity. And this is as we detected. We detected that same species like Cambusia, Holbrochia, Stenopelmus rufinaceus reduces drastically their occurrence in the ponds. Others kept their proportions of occurrences, while others, despite of the low pond connectivity, surprisingly increased their occurrences in 2021. It is the red swan crayfish and Ficella acuta. In this map, we can see very few open circles that are the ponds that had not non-native species any study years, very few ponds, and in red, those that have temporary ponds during the 2 study years. And we can think maybe these red dots are an apparently established non-native species. But we don't know that we know is in La Laguna Larga or del Carrizal, we detected an established population of the non-native Trichocoryza verticalis. This species is tolerant to salinity, and precisely this pond doubled the value of the conductivity that year. maybe that we are assisting is an interaction between desiccation and tendencies of desiccation and then arrival of non-native species. Regarding the biodiversity loss in the macroinvertebrate assemblages, that we know is that we have a reduction in the hydroperiod gradient. Is it? We have less permanent ponds because are disappearing, and we have less ephemeral ponds. Yeah, so the hydroperiod variability is reducing. That we did not detect was some species that were frequently found in permanent ponds, or not so frequently, but was typical to permanent ponds. And also the 50% of the large branchiopod species, which are flagship species of the system, were not detected. These 4 species were not detected, but this year that we made a special effort to detect these species, we did not detect Branchiopus schaefferi and Chirocephalus diaphanus, but we detected the other ones. What is the reason here is because their preferable habitats, ephemeral ponds, are also disappearing. Then we try to think, okay, we are going to look to the biotic homogenization, because biotic homogenization is a phenomenon happening globally and suppose increase in the assemblage similarity of the species across the Earth. And the main causes can be the environmental degradation, the local extinctions, and the non-native invasion of species. And we have these 3 phenomena happening in Doñana. Then we decide, okay, we are going to compare the same ponds pair per pair, only in those ponds that we have data in the 2 study years, 61 ponds. And we expect a biotic homogenization because of the deterioration of the system. But contrary to that, we detected that the assemblages were more different. Why? Because we have different environmental stressors acting at the same time, probably. The pondscape deterioration supposes a low pond spatial connectivity, so it's probable that then it's affecting to have more segregated assemblages over the possible effect of the non-native species to drive biotic homogenization. So we have different stressors with different direction in their effects. This is the other project, which is about large branchiopods, to see how is their role as ecosystem engineers of temporary ponds. They are considered key species because they only can inhabit temporary waters. They are very old, from the Devonic, usually occur in historically preserved ponds. 24 species in Spain, 8 are endemics, and in Doñana we have 3 endemics and 1 near-threatened species. The archaea species then could be used for restoration because they can provide ecosystem services. Here on the right, you can see the possible ecosystem services of a pond that is well preserved. But if we have a pond that is not good, don't have a good preservation, we have these possible ecosystem disservices. We thought that maybe large branchiopods can reduce the proliferation of algae, mainly worry for the proliferation of cyanobacterial algae, can improve the water quality, and can reduce the mosquito proliferation. This is the main chapter of the thesis of Marina Tomás Martín, and is to assess the role of large branchiopods, it's not a large branchiopods, on ecosystem services and ecological functioning of temporary ponds. Focuses on all these variables. So this is the hypothesis, to reduce toxic cyanobacterial blooms, maintain a clear water state, and reduce mosquito populations. What she did? She performed an experiment, mesocosmos experiment, with 3 species in Doñana, Notostraca, Spinicaudata, and Anostraca, and almost synchronically in Poland, okay? with Anostraca and Notostraca. These are the mesocosmos, and she also monitored the mosquito position. We locate periphyton strips in the water, and tea bags and litter bags for the decomposition rate. Then we went to Doñana and collect sediment and zooplankton from 6 ponds, making sure that at least one of them had large branchiopods. Then it was very difficult because we have very few rains that year. So we need to go to the Lucio de Maris Millas, that is in the south of the park. It's far, it's difficult to arrive, but it was a unique pond with water and with large branchiopods, Triops, Anostraca, and Spinicaudata. This is the distribution of our mesocosmos with controls, Anostraca, Spinicaudata, Notostraca, and the combination of different treatments. We have international help, and also international, because here is Adrian. This is international, it's Brazil. And we measure water quality, primary production, chlorophyll, phycocenin, concentration of nutrients, turbidity, dissolved organic matter, and the physicochemical variables. And as preliminary results, very brief, is that Triops, Notostraca, increase the turbidity, but also the chlorophyll and phycocyanin. It increase the primary productivity, the phytoplankton, also through the concentration of the dissolved oxygen, which also increase. Notostraca and Spinicaudata, we did not detect differences in orthophosphate, okay, but we detected differences in the different forms of the dissolved inorganic nitrogen. We did not detect differences in the mosquito position, but maybe we have news later. So, Notostraca increased the turbidity through the increase of phytoplankton, of algae. It could be bioturbation or maybe predation on cladocerans. Notostraca with Anostraca improved the water quality, and Spinicaudata and Notostraca influence the cycle, the recycling of the nitrogen in the ecosystem. Looking at the organism, we detected a serious reduction, all the treatments of large branchiopods, serious reduction in the Cladocera, they are filter organism, an increase in Calanoide, and a reduction here in Culicinae and Chironomidae, both mosquitoes. And we did not detect any effect in the other macroinvertebrates organism. Also, we detected different assemblages according with the different treatments. Okay, so we have performed a lot of activities for dissemination to the society, to the general public, and to other targets of population. And many times the people ask, how can I help to protect the temporary ponds? That happens is temporary ponds are very small water bodies many times, so they are very vulnerable. When smaller they are, more threatened they are, and also more difficult to catalog as temporary ponds they are. Then that we did was to create these sites for a citizen science when people can upload a photography of temporary ponds with their georeference location. And then we now have in the site more than 70 temporary ponds. And this is an example of the output. We have also a form regarding the conservation that they can see our pond. We have done a lot of activities in schools, going to the schools, bringing students. But here in a workshop, international workshop that Polly and me organized last May, conserving and we organized a roundtable with different stakeholders from agriculture, livestock, politicians, conservation managers, and scientists. That is a good experience. Finally, only very short this part, is about the use of large branchiopods as sentinels for the conservation and restoration of temporary ponds in the face of global change. We have a national and international experts, people from Belgium, Polonia, but now from Italy, Norway, national team, and we have Carlos, predoctoral student, as a coming student. Then the branchiopods team is composed from people from the national team of climate skin pond, new incorporations, experts in nutrient pollutions, macroinvertebrates, and in large branchiopods, their PhD students, and international team of RESPOND, same people of the international team of RESPOND, and now we have new incorporations of the variability of the variability of the genetic variability of the population of large branchiopods of Anostraca and also of zooplankton. We have a part that's very important, is the past of the temporary ponds, looking at the egg bank of the sediment of the temporary ponds. This some people call resurrection ecology. And this time, this is because we are trying to work with Linderiella baetica, which is a critically endangered species. And only in May, was included in the Spanish catalog species, so it's very recent. But I would like to tell you something about the history of this Anostracean. This species was maybe detected for the first time in Los Toyos ponds in 1978, but the material was lost. And then these people try again and again and again to recover material to properly identify the species. But the urbanization of the pond was going on until this pond was disappearing. But then they found a population in Carretones in 2007. This is a sad history because now this pond is like that. It's completely destroyed. So this is destroyed. Then that we have now is only the sediment, only the bank of Propagulus to see if we can recover the species. These people that they described was Miguel Alonso and Juan García de Lomas. They made a lot of efforts because he was looking that it is going to happen. They know, they made a lot of efforts to do. So one of them was this school contest that Miguel, I think they know well, to name a new species. And then this species was for this girl, that was the winner. Now, this foundation has this small project to save Linderiella baetica in collaboration with the Iberozoa Association, I don't know if we know that, and the Sociedad Gaditana de Historia Natural, which is very important in this history. And the main promoters of this initiative is Juan García de Lomas and Carlos Vázquez Chavinet. So in the project, what we are trying to do in the project now in branchiopods is to get insight of restoration using Linderiella baetica like a key species. First of all, to try to hatch the species from the sediment to know what are the environmental conditions promoting the hatching, and after that to do experiments of interspecific competition, because this species can coexist with other species. But we don't know with what, and if we need to restore, we need to know with what species is possible to coexist. And also experiment of the sensitivity of nutrient pollution, because we have seen how is the temporary ponds in Spain. So to restore a pond or to create a new pond maybe is not the most useful habitat. We don't know. And finally, we will preserve all the eggs from the experiments to collect them in a center of recuperation of threatened species. Finally, we, in this project, in branchiopods, we need to see how is the resilience of the bank of propagules against global change. Then we have an hypothesis, is we have a reduction of the genetic variability of the large branchiopods populations, mainly Branchiopus cortesi, Tanimastis sternalis, according to pond desiccation and landscape fragmentation. We know ponds that have a long time ago, more than 10 years without flooding, but usually had large branchiopods. And other ponds that they still have inundation. So we need to we want to compare how is the genetic population of these two this population in different ponds, but also in the field across a gradient of fragmentation and gradient of degradation, how is the reduction in the genetic variability of the populations. But then it was supposed to do in the project, no? Here of pond desiccation and climatic chambers, because we cannot have inundation without that, and landscape fragmentation through sampling in the field. But suddenly happened that, okay? We have inundation during 2025, and most of you know that several years ago. So we had also large branchiopods. These are Branchiopus cortesi and Tanimastis sternalis, and appear inside in ponds that was dried before. So then we decided when we needed to go to the field, so we went to the field. And then we had populations in the national park, outside the national park, in the natural park, in Avalario, with a lower level of protection, and in other sites with a larger fragmentation of the habitats and agriculture or livestock management. So now that we want to do is to analyze the genetic variability of the population of these three species of Anostraceae. And finally, it's only to thank you for your attention, but also to all the people that has helped in this field work and permissions of the different autonomous communities here, and also to the equipo de seguimiento de procesos naturales, to be here. Thank you very much.
So, do we have questions?
Thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting. You talk a lot about fragmentation, and lots of these ponds are dry for many years. Do you have estimate of how long can the different species survive in a dry environment under dirt? Or is there, I mean...
No, it's supposed to be more than 10 years.
More than?
More than 10 years. It's supposed that it can survive, they can survive more than 10 years.
But you don't have estimates for different species?
No, that I
guess that just
decades maybe. Yeah. But it's only that you can find. It's something like throwing like that, and not measurable.
And is adults in vegetative stage, its eggs, what, and how they survive?
In the sediment?
Yeah.
From large branchiopods are always eggs. And from other species like zooplankton are eggs, but also they have ephipia that has small baby ones that are dried, embryones, like embryones.
Okay. Thank you.
You said with the remarkable rains that we had that they came back in lots of places around Doñana this year. Do they come back like in the same numbers? Are there lots of them, or are they? Does being dry for a few years impact how they come back?
this year when, I don't know if I understand, but if this year, when the inundation arrived, we have, that I've seen is a lot of individuals of different species coexisting at the same time, because it's a unique opportunity to hatch, and everybody was at the same time in the pond. But depend on the site, because outside of the Doñana National Park, for example, and the natural park, was less frequent, difficult to find outside. Very difficult and in very low numbers in comparison with Doñana.
Super interesting.
Hi. Thank you, Mark. I was really interesting. So I was interested in mosquitoes. So the decrease that you see is because of competition or because they prey on them, or?
Probably a predator. Yeah, I think it's predation. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not sure, because we didn't find anything about the position.
Yes.
So maybe it's predation, direct predation of triops, so the one, no.
Okay.
Only of triops.
And with the other species, it might be the same relationships, like, or competition, some prey of them, with the, not with the mosquitoes, but the other species that you
With
saw.
Cladoceran, probably also predation of triops. Triops are difficult people. Yeah. They predate a lot. Probably it is the reason.
Thank you.
Thank you for a very nice presentation. It's very brave to work with temporary ponds because they are very difficult. They change a lot, so you go 1 year and make comparison with another year, but then all the other years they change all the time. So, and it's very difficult also for the cartography. I was interested in that because it is very difficult to know what you are going to put on a map. How big does it have to be, or how often does it have to have water? Because anything from a little rock pool to a large temporary lagoon is...
About high altitude also, because it's different. No, I think that some of the high altitude we have, because we have Peñalara also. But it is always, if at any orthophoto, that then it's temporary pond. And the site is included everywhere. So all the ponds, because most of the databases include only more than 0.5 hectares, and it's very big for a temporary pond. So we decided to include all the ponds that we managed to revise. We cannot revise all the ponds. So we have 9,000 with the location, the revised location, but also all the literature that they appear, the name of this pond in the different literature, and they are there. If I'm sure, Christian is sure, that this pond is temporary. If we have doubts, it's not included. And that this is a real location. So we have a lot of, many of temporary ponds that we cannot include because of that, because of the revision process.
And then in the map, you showed 2 maps, one from the ministry and one of your project, and they were radically different. The map for the ministry had thousands of ponds in Extremadura and so on in the southwest.
Yeah,
and your map had very few on them.
In Extremadura, they don't have a lot in Extremadura, and Extremadura is always a gap, I think. Eh?
But in the ministry has a lot because they have all the cattle ponds.
Yeah,
and there are thousands of them.
Completely,
so
yeah, I see the real situation. We have tried to include these ponds that is in a paper catalog, so it's not in a PDF, but are all artificial ponds, but it doesn't matter, so I include, okay? But I think also they have a very big gap in Extremadura. Oh, it's nothing. But now it's updated, and again, it's a big gap here. So it's always the same. We made an effort to cover, but still this is the gap. Yeah, exactly, look. Yeah. Is existing here.
Sorry, one more. I was just wondering about conservation strategies for these ponds. And I was thinking, well, maybe it would be a nice system just to make sure that we have a hole deep enough to have water, to make sure that we have water every year, even in the worst years, and that would be a great conservation strategy, hoping that then we have big rains that will flood everything every 10 years and would redistribute the species. But I was thinking at the same time, the chemical conditions change a lot because as the desiccation, the oxygen level, so I assume that the species that live in temporary ponds may be very different from the species living out in ponds that very rarely dry. Are they very different, the fauna, as comparing on the fluctuation of the water level? Because the chemical conditions and the temperature and the oxygen level will change very fast in ones and not so fast in the other ones. Or we have the same species that basically they can stand everything.
You have singular species in the temporary ponds.
But also compared to these ones that are not so temporary, that are almost permanent or
and
permanent.
Also for most permanent ponds, also you have singular species. So if the requirements of them is more than 1 year for the complete the life cycle, then it has to be in permanent ponds. But the thing is that in temporary ponds, they have to have the strategy to escape to this situation, or in the egg bank, or flying, for example. But if the life cycle, for example, for Odonata is very common, you have organisms that need more than 1 year, or even 1 year, then they are not in temporary ponds. But for conservation strategies is to have a pondscape. No? You have different ponds with different surface, with different hydroperiod, and then you have a very important regional pool of species there, because each pond is sharing the species in a sourcing dynamic with the other pond. Is the key, I think. So permanent ponds are also important. It's not only temporary ponds.
Thank you so much for the talk. It's not really my field, but I have a question. If you're interested in sound at all, and
what?
In sound ecology and like
because sound ecology.
Yeah, because what you're doing is basically describing and understanding the mechanisms in each pond. And in my field, in ecoacoustics and in understanding the soundscape, there is actually a big gap of literature, and especially in non-marine ecosystems, in underwater ecosystem. And I'm just thinking that it would be super cool, because I think that underwater microphones can be quite cheap, to have some description of the soundscape in certain ponds, depending on whether or not they're healthy and depending on the species. I know it's been done for because you have very small species, it's been done for monitoring coral reefs, and I don't know if you would be interested, but.
Yeah, I know people that are working on that. It's very interesting. For me, it's very, very interesting, but it's so new that if I do something like that, then the other things are in the other side. But in my opinion, I'm super interested on that, to use index of diversity and things of that, yeah. It's very useful also. Thank you for coming and for the talk. And thank you to everybody.